Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today for our session on the Human Element webinar series. Today's session is titled Security Culture Eats Human Risk for Breakfast, which is something I personally love talking about and will love to talk to our guests today about. Just a brief note on the title, that is a nod to the famous Peter Drucker quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And what that means is that in any business context, if you really want to succeed with your strategy, you always need the right culture in place to support it. And that is as much true in cybersecurity as it is in all other areas of business. And that is the topic that we will be delving into today with utmost experts on the topic. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panel to you today. We have Dr. Jessica Barker joining us today. She is a global leader in the human side of cybersecurity. She's the co-founder and co-CEO of Cygenta, where she's following her passion of positively influencing the cybersecurity awareness, behavior, and culture in organizations around the world. Jessica was recently awarded an MBE by King Charles for her services in cybersecurity, and she is a go-to expert for lots of media outlets around the world for topics on cybersecurity. And not only that, she's also a best-selling author of books called Confident Cybersecurity and Cybersecurity ABCs, as well as her brand new book that launched last week called Hacked: Secrets Behind Cyber Attacks, which we will also be talking about today. So excited to be having you with us today, Jessica. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I'm excited for the discussion.
Great. Next up, we have Dominick Frazier. And Dominick is a security leader with a wealth of experience in IT and cybersecurity. He also goes by the name of Mr. Security Awareness. And in his current role, Dominick works as the head of security education and awareness at Meta, where he is building internal and external programs to further the culture of security awareness. And Dominick's got a long history of working in various aspects of cybersecurity as well as physical security. So we're really excited to have you sharing your knowledge with us today. Welcome, Dominick.
Thank you ever so much. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for all of us. So just happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. And last but definitely not the least, we have our very own Maxime Cartier. Maxime has built security awareness, behavior, and culture programs for global companies in manufacturing, aerospace, and in fashion at H&M Group. And his goal is to help organizations switch from just raising awareness to actually effectively changing behaviors and culture. Maxime is now working with us at Hoxhunt as our head of human risk, where he's helping us develop our product and services to help our clients really succeed in human risk management. So lovely to have you today, Maxime. Welcome.
Thank you, Nora. And it's an honor to be with Jessica and Dominick today. It's going to be a fun panel.
Awesome. And finally, my name is Noura Ahmed Moshe, and I am VP of Strategy and Operations here at Hoxhunt, and it is my pleasure to moderate this discussion today. So let's get into our topic of the day. First off, I would love to ask everybody in the panel about real practical examples of how security culture can manifest itself in organizations. So really like making it concrete. What are some examples that you could name of really good cybersecurity culture in action and also bad or non-advisable security culture in action from things that you've experienced? Jessica, and I'd love to start with you today.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's something that we see played out in lots of organizations. We can look to how people feel about security, how they feel about themselves in terms of security, leadership and security, the security team. We can look at people's behaviors and what they actually do. Because most people, when they make a mistake, when they potentially cause a breach or an incident, the vast majority of people aren't doing that maliciously. They usually have a reason that to them will make sense, will be logical. It may be that the organization prioritizes productivity and speed. over security, despite what might be being said. It may be that targets are set. So, for example, with some of our clients in financial services, when they have customer support teams, if the targets are set that they have to get through those calls as quick as possible and they are measured and rewarded based on how quickly they get through calls, for example, then the message that is sent in the second order impact, if you like, is that the customer service operators may prioritize getting through the calls quickly rather than verifying identity and going through all of the security requirements. So depending on the role, culture can play out in different ways. For example, other clients we work with, the developer teams will either feel closer to security, will want to collaborate, or they'll want to avoid them and do everything that they can to bring security in as late as possible, if at all. We also, of course, see security culture playing out in the extent to which people want to ask questions of the security team, want to report incidents. So in some organizations I've known, people will be terrified to click links in any emails in case it's a phishing simulation, and they get in trouble. And that comes from phishing simulations being used in a way that is not healthy for the culture, where they're seen as a trick rather than training. So a lot of it comes down to whether the culture is one of empathy, one of support, one of putting people at the heart, or where people are almost seen as the enemy, seen as, that classic trope of people as the weakest link. And that can lead to a divide in the culture and a breakdown between the security team and the rest of the organization.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer, Jessica. Dominick, what about you? What examples would you give of good and bad security culture?
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking off of what Jessica presented there, I think there's an element of, and I'm actually going to do this in reverse order. I'm going to go with the less than ideal. Really what we don't want to see is individuals not having personal ownership or investment in security, where they look at it that there's a security team's responsibility or someone else will do it. It happens all too often where individuals may not have the title of security or be on a security team and feel no responsibility or no engagement in actually maintaining the security of the organization. On the flip side of that, the best thing is when individuals have a personal investment in maintaining and adhering to and furthering the actual security culture, even though it may not be their primary job title. What is the most invigorating and gives me goosebumps, even though I think about it, is when teams that aren't in security recognize that there are security elements that they can influence and impact, and they bring it to the table. And now, granted, it may not always get to be the number one priority, but the fact that their mindset and their analysis and their consideration is already including that, that is the thing that warms my heart and gives me the energy to keep coming back to this day after day. So when we can get the teams and the leadership and the individuals, whether they be in security or technical or non-technical roles, really thinking about it as if it were their own responsibility, something they earned, something they created, something they're responsible for, the sky's the limit in maintaining the security posture and however far the organization may go.
Brilliant. Thank you. What about you, Maxime? How would you answer that?
I think one of the things that haven't been said yet that I think is really important is transparency. I think that's typically one of the first things that I try to look at in my first link, whether there's a healthy or not so healthy security culture in an organization. By that, I mean how open the security organization or the top management is about sharing information about security incidents that are happening in the organization. Because there's always security incidents happening, right? So how open are we about the impact about these incidents, about the steps that we're taking, or the steps that everyone should take to contain them or stop them from happening again, right? I think that if you don't have that, if you don't have this transparency and you're hiding security incidents, so a culture that is more secretive, some people might believe that actually, okay, well, there's nothing that has ever happened. It hasn't happened to me, hasn't happened to someone close to me, doesn't seem to have happened to the company. We're pretty safe. I don't need to change anything to what I'm doing today, right? And the second impact is that when an incident is actually too big to be contained or and that it gets out in the company or that it gets out even in the media, if the company is not transparent enough, then the consequence might be even worse, where that often means that people will lose some of their trust in the organization. So transparency as a good element of good or bad security culture, I think.
Brilliant. Some great answers there. That's got me thinking about this kind of individual's responsibility and the things that individuals can do in organizations and employees can do to further cybersecurity culture. And then on the other hand, what leadership can do. So I'd like to explore this topic a little bit and carry on with you, Maxime, if that's okay. From your experience building these security programs, how do you actually engage individuals?
Yeah, as you say, I think it's very important to say and show that the responsibility is everywhere. It's not only in the security team, it's not only in the management, it's everywhere in the organization. Everyone is responsible. Security starts with me. Some people say security starts with you, but it's, a bit pointing fingers. I think security starts with me, with every one of us. And I think there's both the top-down and the bottom-up approach. So, of course, you need to work with leaders. You need to work with leaders to have them endorse security for the organization, right? Say that it's an important topic. Make sure that it's prioritized among all the other business objectives that I'm sure every company has, right? But then we need to work with everyone. And here, I think one of the challenge that we might have is, in my experience, has been mostly for global organization. Global organizations that has more than H&M is more than 150,000 employees in 70 countries with 9 brands. So how can I reach everyone? How can I engage with everyone wherever they are, whatever their culture is, whether they're working in an office, a store, a warehouse, whatever are their security skills today, if they're just starting or at a more advanced stage of their journey. So everyone is different, and especially more in a large organization like this. So even if I have resources to create global training or communication campaigns, they will most likely not be adapted for everyone. Even if I work with local stakeholders and I manage to reach everyone, will people actually engage? So it's very important, I think, for me to make sure that we can have, again, this message that is both shared from the top so that we can make time out of people's busy schedule and show the topic is important, but also make sure that everything that we share is as targeted and relevant as we can, with different initiatives, with tools to support that, so that we can reach the individual and make sure that they understand what they can do.
Great. Thank you. Dominick, you also work in a huge multinational organization. Could you share a little bit about your experience of engaging people when you're dealing with so many different individuals and cultures in the same organization?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is the best and worst challenge about being in the role like this. You have to figure out how to meet people where they're at. I think that is the key part of it. I will sometimes look at the challenge as an opportunity to extend my tendrils into the minds of the members of the organization, because I'm looking to find just that button or just that angle or just that topic that is near and dear to them. And the concept of something, everyone has a price that matters to them that you can find that's really going to hit home and resonate with them. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's, tangible items, sometimes it's, doing the right thing. And when we have the responsibility to make sure that cybersecurity and security wholesale is at the top of mind for the population, we have to make it something that they can personally own and invest in. Because ultimately, the reason why individuals align themselves to the organization is because the organization has some benefit to them and they can bring some benefit to the organization. And when we can really zero in on that wavelength and hit that squarely, we have the opportunity to really empower the individual to say, in my sphere of influence, I can make sure that there is no unreasonable security opportunity or vulnerability or risk that we can't be prepared in order to handle. And I cannot stress enough that empowering the individual to have ownership and responsibility and comfort in owning that security and their realm of influence is the most influential piece of all this. Because if you can disconnect the individual from security, then again, they're going to go back, well, I got my wrist slapped, or I got in trouble for that. Or I was told that it really wasn't that big of a priority. Why am I going to continue to raise my hand or step up or speak out about these items if I'm not going to get a response that makes it seem that it's valuable, appreciated, or wanted? So when you have the opportunity to really calibrate and dial in for the individual and what matters to them, the sky's the limit.
Great. That's fascinating. Now, Jessica, I know you also talk a lot about the sort of psychological and sociological aspects of cybersecurity. And you also mentioned there that a lot of the time, most of the time, people don't do things wrong deliberately. But what do you think about getting into that kind of like psychology part so that individuals start internalizing the cybersecurity so that the behavior actually changes? What have you learned in your work about how to influence that?
I love everything that Maxime and Dominick have shared so far. And Dominick said something earlier that was so important about meeting people where they're. Often, I think in security, historically, traditionally, we have tried to push where we're at onto people. We have tried to tell them what is a priority for us, and in a way that makes sense to us as security professionals. But it's far more powerful if we can understand how our messages can actually get through to people and what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, how they're feeling, their perceptions of themselves. So all of the research out there really shows that the most powerful intervention in cybersecurity, if we're trying to change behaviors, is raising self-efficacy. This is the empowerment that Dominick was speaking about. This ties into the transparency that Maxime mentioned. Is empowering people to not only feel that security is relevant to them, but that they understand how it relates to them, and that they feel confident that they can engage in the measures and the behaviors we're recommending. This is far more powerful than trying to scare people with the threat. If we look at the psychology of fear, decades of research on this, we know that if we go heavy on the threat, but we don't tell people what they can do about it, then actually people go into denial, they go into avoidance, they go into reactance. They will do anything they can to put their head in the sand and think, this doesn't apply to me, or this threat is being overblown. It's like the boy who cried wolf. Security just likes the sound of their own voice. What we need to do instead is, of course, educate people about the threats, but in a way that is proportionate, realistic, that is not trying to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt to scare people into security, and instead focus on how we can raise their self-efficacy, help them understand not just why security matters, why it matters to me, and what I can do to engage with it. So giving people the support, giving them the tools, giving them the guidance that is practical and that is relevant and makes sense to them.
Right. Jessica, you mentioned about threats and sorts of threats that are out there and people sort of familiarizing themselves with that. And of course, you can't escape this topic nowadays without talking about AI, because we all know that AI is really impacting the threats that we have out there. But I'd like to also ask you about what you think about the implications of AI on security culture, and how does that impact this involvement of getting people involved in cybersecurity?
Not a day goes by at the moment where I'm not talking about AI. I'm sure it's the same for everybody joining us on this call and, here in this group having this discussion. AI is such a big topic at the moment. Of course, for the last few years, we've been saying it's coming. It's going to have a big impact on social engineering. We're really seeing that start to play out. For me, I've been hearing some discussions in some of my circles of people saying, what are we going to do? AI has raised the sophistication that cyber criminals are able to use, obviously also the speed and the scale. But I've heard some concerns from people. How are we now going to help people be resistant to social engineering, which obviously we're already struggling with when it is powered by AI, and there have been cases already hitting the media of that happening. For me, for a long time, I've been saying that we need to move on from a tactical approach to social engineering. The advice of looking for bad spelling and grammar, hovering over the link, looking at the sender's address, too often has been lulling people into a false sense of security, even before we hit AI. For me, we need to take a more strategic approach. We need to help people develop and understand and tap into critical thinking. We need to help people tap into how communications make them feel. Is it unexpected? Is it making you feel an emotional, visceral response, hurried, worried, scared, flattered? And is it asking you to do something? If so, that's when you need to verify. So actually, I feel like AI is forcing us to step up our game, which we should have already been doing a long time ago, to encourage people to develop more of an anti-scam mindset where social engineering in whatever form is more easy to identify based on how it makes me feel, based on what mindset it puts me into. And that's just really my take on what it means for our communications and how we can think about helping people be more resistant to AI-fueled social engineering.
And if I can add to that, actually, we don't often look at the positive side of AI in this discussion. And also, I mentioned meeting people where they're at. And I love this concept too. I think it's really important if we want to have an impact. And I really think that AI can help us with that, actually, because how do you meet people where they're at scale? Again, when you have 100,000 people. And I think that here AI can actually really help us to target our communications or security training in a better way to, again, meet people where they are. We create something that is a bit more specific to them using AI, using automation, so that we don't only create global security training, global security communications, but we use the power of these tools to reach everyone, again, at the right level with the right context.
Yep. Great. And what I love about this topic and why we are talking about the human element here is that we talk about something so technical like AI, but we're talking about feelings and attitudes and the psychology, and just boils down to something that myself and Maxime have had many conversations about, which is sort of people's attitudes and also the relation of their attitude to the feeling of psychological safety when it comes to security. Maxime, would you like to share your thoughts a little bit about that? Like, how does the attitude, security attitude, relate to this?
Yeah, so security attitudes is a part of security culture. It's the part we most commonly think about, the perceptions, the feelings. I think that security culture is more than that, actually. Security culture is a combination of three things: the attitudes, how people feel about security, but also knowledge, what they know about security, and behaviors, what they do about security. Those three elements, and those are three elements that you can measure. But when it comes to attitudes, self-efficacy is a big part of this. Jessica mentioned, I think there's different elements, but self-efficacy has been shown by research in security to really have a positive impact on security behaviors. The more people feel that they can have an impact, that they can do something about security, the more they would actually do something about it. Psychological safety is another big one. So do people feel safe in the organization, safe to make mistakes, to learn from them, to talk about everything, to be themselves at work? That's a basis that we need so that people would actually report security incidents, for example. If they don't have that, they will try to hide these incidents, going back to the transparency part. So psychological safety is a big one. I think when it comes to attitudes, a couple of other elements that I found have a strong correlation to actual risk and to actual behaviors are leadership endorsement. If leaders are encouraging their teams to participate and to engage in security activities, and the social part of it, social acceptability. Are people just talking about security? Is it accepted to take time out of your agenda to work on security? Those are just some of the elements. I'm sure there are some other dimensions to attitudes, but those are some of the very big ones.
Right. Dominick, how do you feel about this concept of psychological safety and cybersecurity culture in your work? Do you feel it's something you need to put a lot of effort into working on, or how does it manifest itself in your work?
Oh, I think that it is baked in from the start. I think it's one of the core ingredients. You can never have an effective or substantial security education or security awareness program in any organization, whether it be a mom and pop shop or be a more mature or larger organization, without taking into consideration how do the entities, and I say entities on purpose because when you have other organizations that you do dealings with, you have to think about how do they look at security as well, because there's going to be a give and take when it comes to how security best practices, how security behaviors are actually executed and implemented. I can tell stories from past organizations with dealing with partners in other organizations that their security expectations and practices didn't match the organization that I was a part of. And there was a little bit of tension and there was a little bit of back and forth, and individuals were like, we don't understand why you need this or why we have to check that. Or we have to validate this because we just want to get to the objective that is being pursued. And that in its own right can erode or undermine the security culture of your organization if you have a more robust or a more prominent element of that in your business. So it can never be ignored, but it should never actually be the leading part of it either, because Security is a function of the business. It's there to support the business in order to maintain the ability for the business to do what it has been created to do. And I think sometimes some of us in this space will forget that our purpose, our roles are there as a part of the business. And we have to really make sure that we understand how do we add that benefit to the organization without throwing sand in the gears to prevent the actual objectives from being able to be accomplished in an efficient and effective manner.
Great point there. How would you go a step further and sort of talk about how we actually prove the value of these activities and measure that we're making progress? And as you rightly said, showing that these activities and creating a strong cybersecurity culture is actually a business benefit.
My favorite acronym in business is that ROI, the return on investment, when it comes to this space. All too often, this space is seen as an investment that doesn't benefit or become profitable. And in order to begin to show that or to prove that, we have to look at historical evidence. Sometimes some organizations, they have already had a number of situations, I tend to call them, that are security based that could have been avoided or could have been reduced in their severity or size had some of the understanding of some of the processes and some of the checks and balances been adhered to. Oftentimes, these flubs or these slips that impact the outcome of a product or the outcome of a process, there were some side steps taken. And being able to show that had the process been adhered to, that has been spoken about from the organization from a security standpoint, you can show that we wasted X number of dollars or X number of people hours investing in cleaning this up or to remediate this. And that's a really easy one. The other piece of it is how long or how quickly does it take for those incidents to be reported and be acknowledged? A lot of organizations have a lot of great tools, but I stand firmly behind the fact that our people are our best resources when it comes to maintaining an organization in any capacity. They are literally going to either make or break you, regardless of size. I think, again, going back to mom and pop, if you have someone behind a counter who isn't really approachable or they kind of have like an attitude that puts people off, chances are you're not going to get a whole lot of patrons. But if you are approachable, you are respectable, you are reasonable, again, meeting people where they're at, you're going to see a bigger return on visitors and clients, and profitability will come as a result thereof. So we have to be very, very mindful of the fact that our people make or break us. So if we aren't really focusing on that, we're going to have an uphill battle with an already lubricated slope. So it's going to be very difficult to move forward from there.
Great. Thank you. Jessica, what about you? What sort of learnings could you share about the different organizations that you've worked with in terms of how to measure security culture and prove its value?
Partly it's about understanding what is really valuable to the organization. Obviously, that's going to come down for many organizations to the bottom line, but also things like productivity, how staff, members of the organization are feeling. And we can look then at whether those values are aligned. So the organizational values, are they aligned with the security values? Is it all moving in the same direction? Or do we have organizational values that actually the security team's messaging and values and what they're communicating is at odds with? We can look at perceptions. How do people feel about security? Going back to that self-efficacy. How do people feel about leadership and their priorities? How do they feel about psychological safety and a just culture? Do they feel that incidents, when an incident occurs, that the investigation looks at what went wrong, or does it look at who can be blamed and try and scapegoating? And of course, we can look at awareness, levels of awareness and behaviors, what are people actually doing, and we can see the disconnect there. We can look at lots of metrics to show actually whether security culture is progressing, whether it's advancing in a way that the organization and the security team wants. And we can then look at lots of metrics that can show a return on investment. Dominick's obviously already touched on some. We can also look at things internally like password resets. How long does it take the security team to be dealing with password resets? Is it chewing up lots of their time? Just things like this that can actually show productivity, show demand on time, and show whether security behaviors are healthy, and then whether they contribute to the organization or whether they chew up time and actually detract from the organization being able to move as fast as possible.
Great points. Thank you. Maxime, what about you? What would you like to add to that?
I think I'm a scientist by trade. So when I think about the business value or the ROI, I think that actually the closest thing in security is risk reduction. And what does clearly affect risk reduction is behavior change. So if we can see that people are adopting more of secure behaviors or are taking less of the risky behaviors, then we can show this risk reduction. And I think typically that's enough value proved, I would say. All the examples that have been given by Dominick and Jessica are great. I love the example about the password resets and how much time it's taking, and that you can quantify that and show the amount of money that you're saving by limiting those password resets. But again, on this direct kind of connection between risk and behaviors, you can measure in a lot of different ways. Measure with phishing simulations, measure by looking at your security tools, whether it's the Microsoft Defender suite or a CASB or a proxy, and just look at what people are actually doing. And whatever intervention you're attempting, whether it's a training, a communication campaign, the deployment of a new tool, changing a process, is it making a difference in terms of actual behaviors? And if it is, then I think you've achieved what you wanted to do.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, I think as you've all sort of said, it's so important for people to understand about their secure behaviors and how it impacts the organization. But something that I also find is fascinating is for people to be educated on how actually hackers work and what's sort of behind their behavior. And that's something that I would like to ask Jessica about a little bit in terms of her new book, because I know that you've delved even deeper into the sort of what actually motivates hackers. What could you share with us today that you learned in writing your new book that sort of impacts on how people's understanding of hacker behavior could help them maybe protect themselves?
Absolutely. So in fact, I take different threats and delve into each one by telling lots of stories, going through lots of, publicly known incidents, interviewing lots of people in the field, from victim advocates to experts, investigators, and ex-fraudsters. And what I'm really looking to do in that book is bring cybersecurity to life, to go behind the headlines and help people understand how some of this actually works, what the motivations are, what the methods are, how it plays out for all of us. And then also, ultimately, really importantly, for every one of those threats that I really dig into, what people can do to protect themselves. And feedback I'm getting is that people are telling me, it's opening their eyes, but also that there is compassion throughout the book. And that's really important to me. It's been a cornerstone of my work for the 13 or so years I've been in the industry, is not just scaring people, but helping them understand the reality of cybercrime while also taking a compassionate and empowering approach. And when we're looking really from the attacker mindset, it's important to break down those different attack groups. We can very easily talk about criminal hackers or attackers, but when we're communicating about cybersecurity and about those attacks, it can be helpful to communicate to people the different kinds of groups that we see out there, from the nation state through to the script kiddies, the have-a-go hackers, and then, of course, in the middle, the financially motivated organized criminal gangs. I think a lot of people out there don't realize that the reason we have seen such a huge rise in cybercrime and cyber attacks is because financially motivated organized gangs, professional, if you like, they are the ones carrying out the bulk of attacks. If you are affected by cybercrime, the likelihood is it's an organized gang doing it. They are operating in a very professional way. They are using tactics that are tried and true. And that is why people are so vulnerable. It's really fighting against this idea. Whenever I interview someone or speak to someone who's been the victim of a scam or social engineering, unfortunately, one of the first things they will say to me is, "I feel so stupid." And we are really fighting that, helping people to understand that being a victim does not make you stupid. It simply makes you human.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Dominick, what about you in your work context? How much do you talk about or educate your staff or users on how actually the attackers are working and how to sort of learn from that?
Oh, that being in the tech space is, it's my bread and butter because when you are basically sharing the same operating space as the less than ideal actors, you have to be very in tune to the tactics that they're deploying and employing. To Jessica's point, the professionalism that we've seen in recent years and grow and increase for our bad actors, for lack of a better phrase, is probably the most alarming aspect of it because it was a tried and true element that we would provide or prescribe to individuals, say, look for these tactical elements that are going to be red flags for you. And the cat and mouse game, they realized that that was what was giving them away. So they evolved. And as we continue to play this cat and mouse game, we have to make it one of the talking points with the staff, with their employees, with, volunteers, anyone affiliated with the organization, that it may look like a duck, it may walk like a duck, but it could be a goose. And we have to be very sensitive to recognizing what do we see in front of us and treating it appropriately, because one slip up can have negative impact. It's not going to be the end of the world because you have a slew of resources and people behind you to support you. And that is probably the biggest part of this, is that understand that it's not always going to be safe, but you will be protected as you navigate. And I can't make that point any more clear. I probably could with a word choice, but the idea here is that we want to make sure that everyone knows that the world that we operate in, there are dangers, but there are as many protections around to help you navigate that space. So we continue to make that a focal point and probably will for the foreseeable future.
Great. Thank you. And Maxime, what about you in your work in building these security awareness programs? How have you balanced that sort of feeling of fear and understanding about the attacks that are out there with the feeling of psychological safety and people knowing how to protect themselves and feeling good about cybersecurity?
It's a great point. And I think, everything I try to do when it comes to security awareness is positive, right? Again, away from the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But I love the stories about real attacks because they're stories. People like stories. Instead of giving high-level guidance about, you should care about how you protect your information because they can be cyber attacks and it can cause a lot of damages to the company. If you actually have an example of an incident that you can tell the story of how it happened and not leave it there, but what can people do for it not to happen again? Right. That's the positive spin on it, right? Not leaving people feeling a lot of fear or hopeless because this happened again, but no, I know what I can do for it not to happen ever again. And I love actually not to tell these examples myself, but if I can have the person who has actually been close to the incident tell it from their perspective. This is super powerful.
Amazing. Great points there. But what I would like to ask everybody now, as we are drawing to a close, is if somebody is listening to our conversation now and thinking like, oh no, we don't really have a security culture in our organization, or we don't have any of these psychological safety around cybersecurity or attitudes that we want. What sort of tip would each of you give to an organization that's now listening who really wants to do something about changing their cybersecurity culture for the better, but doesn't really know where to start? Maxime, could I ask you first, please?
Sure. First, whether you know it or not, you have a security culture. It might be good or bad, depending on your standards, but you have one. So the first thing is, of course, collect data about it, be as evidence-based as possible. Talk to people at the very least to gather some anecdotal evidence. If you can maybe do a survey or run some focus groups to understand what is actually your security culture. But then what I like to do, what I've done in my almost all of my previous companies, to release something that is kind of completely different from what security has done before. A different tone of voice, a completely different design or format from whatever has been done before. It's kind of a way to wipe the slate clean and say, hey, we're changing. We're doing something new. We've heard you, right? And of course, test this new training, this new communication campaign, this new tool before with a representative group of people if you can, because what you think is good might not be what the majority of people like, unfortunately. So of course, test it before, anchor it with the relevant stakeholders. But then again, when you release this, something that is a bit different and you see the reaction of the wider audience, I think it's really worth it. It's a great way to send this message that we're changing. Let's build trust again. And that's also quite a motivation boost, I think, for the whole security team.
Great. Thank you, Maxime. Jessica, what about you? What tip would you give to somebody who wants to start on their security culture journey?
Maxime took the words out of my mouth. If you think you don't have a security culture, then newsflash, you do. You just don't understand it. And it probably means you've got some work to do. But that's an opportunity. And that's an opportunity for you to really understand the organization that you're working in. And I would say take that time to really understand what the culture is like. And for this, for me, it's about actively listening. If possible, being able to ask questions of people, being non-judgmental in the answers, and really showing that you are wanting to collaborate and listen. Trust can take a long time to build, but it can be destroyed really quickly. So as you're doing this work, being sure not to overpromise and being sure to be very clear in what you want to know from people and what you're going to do with that information, and really looking at the values of the organization and understanding, for example, a healthcare organization I worked with some time ago, they were struggling to advance their security culture and they couldn't understand why. When we dug into it, the organization had a very positive culture that was very people-centric, but the security messaging had all been typical traditional security messaging that was very it was very negative, and it was very technology-centric. So trying to understand that and working out actually if you can align your security culture where appropriate with the organizational culture, then that can really help to supercharge your program. Thinking about social proof. So who is influential in the organization? This will really nearly always be leadership, but there will also be other influencers throughout the organization you can tap into. If the timing's right, a champions program can be, or an ambassador program can be really beneficial in that. But helping to understand actually who leads the way in terms of hearts and minds, and then you can develop relationships with those people and listen to them to understand where there are challenges, where there are concerns, while you communicate what you're hoping to advance from a security perspective.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the answer. And finally, Dominic, what advice would you give?
Well, it's tough when you have those two to follow behind, but I mean, really hit all the speaking points there. But what I'll do is I'll take it up a level. And I think the overarching concept that resonates in my mind is make it meaningful, make it mean something, because it means everything to those who are receiving your message to know that you are truly invested, you are truly behind the conversation, behind the ask, behind the requirements that you are asking for those to participate in. And if it's just, talking head speak or anything like that, people are very good at seeing through that. And if they realize it's hollow, you're never going to get their support. You're never going to get them to come along with you on the journey. Because if you can't meet them where they're at and be a genuine, approachable, and real person to them, whether it is your security team or your ambassador group or your champions group, whomever it is going to be helping further that message, then you've already lost before you ever got started. So making it meaningful from the start is the best way to start, in my opinion.
Brilliant. Absolutely great advice from all of you today, and really brilliant having this conversation. We're out of time, and I really would love to thank you, our participants today, for sharing all your knowledge and helping our listeners learn how they can improve their cybersecurity culture. As we've learned, it is a human topic, and with humans, we need to meet them where they're at, and we could do that by just listening to them and meeting them as humans. So thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to all our listeners. You can always reach us at hoxhunt.com. And remember to tune into our other Human Element webinar sessions as well. Have a great day, and thank you all so much. Bye.